Welcome to the DIY Syndicate podcast, reaching out to its listeners from North Coast Studios in Fremont, Ohio, where all things DIY come to the forefront of an ever-changing entertainment industry. Listeners can reach out to the podcast with questions via facebook.com/DIY Syndicate. Thanks for listening, and here are your hosts, Ian Reiter and Alan Fisher.
Hey guys, welcome to the DIY Syndicate podcast, yet again from Fremont, Ohio and North Coast Studios with a wonderful, wonderful interview with an old friend of mine and current guitar player for Blessthefall, Mr. Elliott Gruenberg. I think it was absolutely very insightful.
Yeah, I think it's pretty awesome that we've been actually kind of blessed with having some great guests kind of locked in here. You know, obviously with John Stocking last week, we got Elliott now, and, you know, coming up is Dave Smalley.
Holy fuck.
Just all these people that are coming out of the woodwork for us to just kind of be involved and see the potential of this podcast and how we're touching, you know, musicians, music, and art and everything else in the entertainment industry. I think that's real important. I really appreciate everybody's efforts. On another note, it's Halloween.
Oh, fuck.
It's Samhain. Samhain.
All Hallows Eve.
Moving to Ohio from Massachusetts a long time ago, I was really shocked at the fact that you go trick-or-treating during the day on a main street in the town, not in neighborhoods. I was like, what? What is this? It's like, is that how it's always been for you guys? I mean...
It depends on what part of the state you're from or just essentially what city or town you live in, because in Gibsonburg, when I was growing up, I remember it being significantly dark.
Well, yeah.
I mean, there was a curfew, but it wasn't like a really like strict, like it. At this time, we're going to have cops roaming around, making sure you hoodlums aren't doing anything. We tended to kind of just go into whatever neighborhood. It wasn't just the main drags. I mean, everybody had their porch light on for the most part, and you're handing out candy. I think in this current vulnerable PC world, it's become it's got to be in daylight. It's got to be on a main street with a lot of people, so shit can't happen.
I just don't get that. I really don't.
It takes the spooky fucking element out of Halloween.
Well, for me, For me, I mean, growing up in New England, I mean, it's the epitome of witches and ghouls and everything else.
Fucking Salem.
Yeah. You know, I had this conversation with my girlfriend. The things that we did as children, you know, nowadays would be, you know, ruled, you know, you would be arrested.
You'd be thrown in the clink.
I mean, from lighting, you know, piles of shit on fire and on people's doorsteps to, you know, egging people to, you know, coming up with some twisted way to kind of ruin somebody's evening, I guess. We were great at it. And, you know, I was really shocked at the fact that, you know, everything when I came here was that everything was in daylight. And I'm like, well, that kind of kills everything. That kills the mood of Halloween. And, you know, I mean, I think about like being like 10 years old, and it was like an excuse for my parents to just say, get the hell out of the house so I don't have to see you.
Fucking go get some sugar.
You know, 10 years old, being able to, you know, be roaming the neighborhood until 11:30 at night on a school night, you know, where you can't beat that. So I don't know. I thought I'd bring that up because I thought it was kind of funny. So.
And that kind of brings up a memory of something my brother and I used to do. And in even recent history, we kind of realized that as things got a little stricter and the tomfoolery couldn't happen as much as we did when we were a lot younger. I remember maybe 5 years ago or so, we were on my parents' front porch when we still lived at home, and he put out his bass amp on the porch, and he plugged in his phone with an aux port, and we just played the entire discography of Typo Negative, just blasting the low end and handing out candy.
Pete Steele just threw the horns up from his grave.
Yeah. Well, he wasn't. Oh my God, he would have been dead by then. It's been that long. He died in 2010. Oh no.
Weren't you Pete Steele last night for Halloween?
I was Peter Steele for Halloween last night, but I was like an obscure Pete Steele because I didn't want to shave my beard.
Yeah, he kind of looked more like Rob Zombie in my opinion.
Because I kept referring to myself as 2009 Pete Steele, where he had grew like a huge black. I'll even while Alan's here, we'll pull up the picture I referenced.
So he basically had a bloated beard, bloated gut, you know, just kind of like in his depressive state. Oh yeah, definitely, that was you.
Yeah.
That was totally you. All you needed was the flight jacket.
Yeah. Well, I had the camo jacket.
Oh, right.
And the olive green shirt and the fucking. I darkened my beard. And I also had the dad gut. But
you're about the same height.
Yeah. Oh, that guy, he's a big motherfucker.
Yeah,
he's maybe. I think he was like 6'8".
He was very, very tall.
He talked like this.
Yeah.
I'm a dick from Brooklyn. Oh, you like carnivore? Fantastic.
Seduced your girlfriend right there.
He did right in front of me. He was, he wasn't interested in talking to me at all. He was just more interested in talking to my girlfriend. So, hey, why don't you come on back and I'll show you a few things.
Jesus Christ. Well, anyway, here's the interview with Mr. Elliott Gruenberg from Blessthefall. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing good, man. How are you?
Wonderful. Before we kick this off here, I had a chance to be able to catch up with you a little bit, and it's absolutely, heartwarming for me because I haven't seen you, I think, since 2012.
Oh, it's been a minute.
It's been a hot rock solid. I think the last time I saw you was in Piqua.
Oh God.
You were at Conviction's first major show.
Yeah, sounds about right.
I think that was 2011 or 2012. We sort of have a common theme here of we have the yin and yang effect, as you would know. I mean, Al's from the old school.
Hey, how's it going?
And and then myself, I'm from the kind of like the newer school, the early mid 2000s. And and our first interview was with Mr. John Sox from the FUs and Straw Dogs, and he was from East Coast Boston punk hardcore scene. And now it's my turn to have a special guest. Yeah, it's my turn.
I'm showing my new school here.
Yeah, and you're my first white belt representative, as I like to say it. And I'm sure Elliott can remember this era of when As I Lay Dying came out, and
the studded white
belt era.
Yeah, like the studded white belt.
Studs.
2007.
Yeah, I'm guilty.
Yeah, literally, and it's funny because anybody from our age group who was in that scene of the mid 2000s Warped Tour and Sounds of the Underground. Now you look at them now, and a lot of them are kind of like business stiffs or whatever, and you're like, hey, do you remember the white belt era? And 9 times out of 10, they kind of sit back and go, yeah. Yeah, and there's no explanation. They just know.
Yeah, don't know why I did it, but I had one.
Yeah, people I didn't even remember being into the same stuff. They recall oh yeah, no, I had a white belt. No, dude, I had the Skechers Vans. Oh yeah, no, we all had the emo swoop haircut.
Definitely
the pre-Bieber.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy because when you talk about that era and the Vans Warped Tour, and it's kind of for me, I look back at that, I'm like, all right, well, 10 years later, Warped Tour is still a thing for me.
Yeah.
So I see the newer generations, and I see things come back, and I see there are some people that are still doing the white belt. That still isn't dead for everybody, and it's easy to look at that, and sometimes more times than not these days, I'm just you do it, whatever you want, whatever you want to wear, that's awesome, because you're actually out here supporting the bands and at the show and doing the meet and greets and everything, and that's kind of one of those where, as I've gotten older, it's just more appreciated. I think you kind of grow to love those kids, even though
exactly
you might be I used to have that same belt or whatever 10 years ago.
Yeah, you have that moment, I can only imagine. I remember the first time you and I had an actual full-on conversation. It was Warped Tour 2007, or it might have been Sounds of the Underground. I can't remember which one it was. It was either Warped Tour.
If it was Sounds of the Underground, I was in a white shirt getting jizzed on by Guar.
Yes.
And that was just whatever you throw at me, put it on this white shirt.
Yeah. and then you had I think you had your go-to camouflage cargo shorts.
Oh yeah.
And you had your snake bite lip piercings.
Oh God.
And your straightened black hair. And
I never straightened them, so that was the only thing that I had. It was a genetic emo. It was a genetic straight hair.
It was all natural. The secrets are being revealed. It was one of those shows, and it was. I think this is I think you had just joined Settle the Sky.
Okay.
And
I can blow your mind here because I know my first conversation with you, and it was way before that.
Oh man. Okay.
My first interaction with you, I'm pretty sure I was going to shows. Just started going to shows in Fremont. Had been going to this venue called the Gauntlet up in Port Clinton, which is just shot. And I remember just meeting some of the local Fremont guys. And I remember going, and you guys had this like rec hall at where they do the raceway.
Yeah.
Run Into the Shadows were playing. And I just remember showing up. Settle the Sky played as well, but I remember you were playing. And you had the full swoopy hair and and it was just like fucking windmills during Run Into the Shadows.
Oh, that's funny.
I don't remember. I think you had a Marshall. I don't think it was a Crate. I think
no, it was
Sky.
It was that shitty solid state Marshall half stack it's like the starter kit.
Yeah, we can talk about that. Talking about advantages and things that the kids these days have compared to what we had.
Oh yeah. Just wait.
It exists.
No.
But yeah, I think I remember that.
Was that Fish
I was
Fest?
Just blown away. Yes,
that was Fish Fest. No shit.
Yeah, and that was it, because I remember I went with Kylie and James at the time. I'm pretty sure, and yeah, it was cool, man. It was me just getting into like going to live music outside of like the comfort zone of Portland, which is not very extensive, obviously. He's talking about Ohio. And no, that was cool. That was like when I was being introduced to this kind of like darker subculture. It was just like as I would go to shows more, I was just like seeing like, oh, there's other people that are into this. There's other people that are doing this. Like, this is awesome. It's kind of building this community. But yeah, that was the first time. I'm pretty sure I like fanned out a little bit and was like, man, that was a really good show, dude. You killed it. And I just will never forget the windmills. I felt like I was watching Shadows Fall, and if I got hit, I was like, my foot's hit.
I can show you. Give it up, put your faith in me. Take your life in a new direction. Follow me, I feel like it's over you. Give it up, put your faith in me. Take it all in a new direction. Follow me, I feel like it's over you. Give it up, put your faith in me. Take your life in a new direction.
And that was Standing on the Ashes by Blessthefall, followed by House of Suffering by the Bad Brains.
You know, I kind of want to get into your beginnings as a musician, because I can recall one of our conversations was you're like, yeah, I play guitar. And I was like, oh, dude, that's sick. What kind of guitar you got? I think you had a Viper, maybe.
Oh yeah, I had a Viper.
That was like one of your first rippers, and I'm like, oh, that's cool, you know. And I see you around sometimes, and like then I first saw you at your first show with Settle the Sky, and in conversation with the Settle the Sky guys, I got the impression of you were the most, what's the good way to put it? You're the most disciplined guitar player they had ever seen, and your practice regimen was insane, and you were like 15. And you were a kid. And when I first saw you, you were a fucking ripper. Like, you shredded. And like, I remember,
I don't know where that went. I wish I could still do that stuff.
dude, same. I think I have a theory somewhere, because I think I heard some old stuff I was writing, and I recorded on my laptop from like 2006, and I was doing shit back then I can't even fathom to do now.
Yeah, I feel the same way sometimes. I feel like the older I get, the slower my fingers are. So it's sometimes but you know what? Like we can get into that later.
Now you know how I feel when I wake up in the morning.
It's crazy. Yeah.
Do you recall at one point in time, Fremont and even Toledo, sort of like just this little northwest corner, was sort of a bustling little scene going on here, was it not?
Oh, I felt like we had a great scene going, and even today when we do shows, I always kind of like reminisce about things, and like when I talk about like promoting shows and how like I knew you don't really appreciate it till it's gone, but like, you know, the scene of our generation, I don't think kids do it like they used to for us. I think we were very, you know, privileged to have such a appreciative and loving scene, and we also worked our butts off to make it. You know, we had the ambition and the enticement to go out there and really try and encourage people. You know, I heard on your last podcast you're talking about like MySpace and all that, and it's like that changed the game for us. That was how it was so much easier for me to get people from other towns to come. You know, and it was cool. Fremont and Toledo, and even like going towards Cleveland a bit, I felt like we had a good scene going, you know? I feel like that's the point though, is people like wanted to go to local shows so much that they would drive. And I can't imagine it's the same way nowadays as much. And maybe I'm just older and just a little out of touch with the Ohio scene, but because there are still great bands, like, you know, Convictions, like talking about them, they're still doing a lot of work. I just saw those guys not too long ago out at a festival in Texas, and it you know, it's really cool to see them still doing their thing and going for it and putting out records and touring. Like that's really awesome, and it's really awesome to see that the stems of that still exist out of the scene that I like to think that we all collaboratively built.
Yeah.
But yeah, that scene was amazing, you know, and I think a lot of it had to do with just like timing and everything else. I mean, no, like it wasn't, you know, Boston in the 80s or anything great like that, but
no, but you know what? I see a lot of continuity between the two, because after what you just said there, I mean, and using Convictions as an example, you know, I always have a saying is you get out of what you put into it. So, I mean,
right.
You guys probably put a lot of effort into it, and when social media really kicked off, it really kind of changed things. But in my opinion, I mean, we didn't have that, so we really had to put a lot of effort into trying to figure out how to get people to the shows.
I can't even imagine. I mean, I've talked to some guys, you know, that are products of some of the older hardcore scenes from what I'm affiliated with, and it goes against the odds in a lot of cases, and it's amazing how I think it goes back honestly to what I was saying of like creating like a subculture, you know, and it's just, you guys had just such a flourishing community going, and I mean it flourished so hard that it impacts music today. You know, every band can say, oh well, that band, you know, if it didn't impact your band, it impacted the band that you're impacted by, you know. So it's crazy.
Yeah, it's a big domino effect.
Yeah, definitely. It's a domino effect. Exactly. So even today, I mean, I think that stands strong, and I think like just, you know, obviously quite a different scene over in Ohio, but I'm proud of all of that. I think that like when we talk about like when we reminisce about some of the older shows and everything, I think we did a lot of good with a lot less. We really were not playing with a full deck of cards, and we still, you know,
We made it work.
Yeah, we still made it work. I mean, it was cool, and we were lucky to have a scene that worked together. Also, just kids that were into it. It was cool. It was fun, and it was inviting. That was really like something I always will look back on and be really proud of. I mean, whether it be just like the local scene or like everything that like transpired after it, it's so cool. So that's another reason why I love seeing that like Conviction's still killing it,
Yeah.
because those dudes work their butts off and they have for a long time, and they deserve everything they get.
Just listening to you talk, and we're us at this point of the podcast of just sort of reminiscing before you kind of get into the meat of like current status quo. You know, it's sort of funny that even like 10 years later, I still run into people who have not seen or me or anybody I might be with in over a decade, and they'll be like, "Dude, I used to see you at shows." It'll be just like some random dude.
That happens to me too when I come home sometimes. Same kind of thing. Not even with Blessthefall. Like people like that don't even know that even happened, or even like
I
before
know
that.
you.
They're just like, didn't you used to go to Pontifex shows? I'm like, yeah, I might have gone to one or two.
Of the things to know me for, you know, I've put out X amount of records with my new band that's absolutely killing it still. But you remember me from Pontifex, and I don't know. I think that's kind of cool.
I love it.
Yeah, jumping off of that, kind of in that span of reflection, both in the scene that you and I came from, but also kind of thinking about the scene that came before us. You know, what were the things done in those scenes that you feel that needs to be utilized again in this current climate of that's sort of kind of being stagnant?
Like I said, I think having ambition and drive are two things that really hinder the current scene. I think that with technology, things become easier, and you just kind of like everything kind of falls in your lap. You know, where like when we wanted to go to tour, we had to go print out maps and like directions and then like follow them to a T to get there. And nowadays, you know, obviously have a GPS in your phone. Like it's just like things, commodities like that just come so much easier nowadays. So I think that because of that, we see a lack of drive, and we see kids that just kind of expect it to kind of all fall into place. Like they just want to go pay the extra money, get a quality recording, have someone write their song. You know, it doesn't really break any barriers, and then just get signed, and the floodgates open, and they're just huge. And you know, for some bands, admittingly, it really is that easy. Just knowing the right people, networking wise.
Yeah.
However, there are lots of bands that work really hard for everything they have, and I think the bands in the past every band worked hard, whether you made it or not. Like, yeah, like the couple bands we can all name off that are still killing it or have a lasting impact. You know, they worked hard, but how many other bands supported those shows that worked just as hard that no one's heard of? You know, like
Yeah.
And no one walks away with a sour taste in their mouth from being in those bands. If not, it's just pride, because you know, even though like, yeah, you might work in an office now or whatever, but it's the same thing as like the white belt, where it's like we were all there doing that. And I think a lot of bands just like, it's really easy to just expect everything to be given to you, and they don't understand the amount of work and patience and practice. And they need to realize that it's never going to get easier. Even for me today, I think that's a delusional concept that, you know, oh, you get signed and you can put a record out, and you know what, you can do pretty well in certain areas of the world, and that's wonderful, and you're obviously very thankful for that, but that doesn't make it easier. So it never, like, I just think that kids in certain bands have a hard time with that nowadays. So
it's kind of crazy hearing you say these things, because you're currently part of a band that has paid their dues.
Yeah, I mean, before I was in it, they paid their dues.
Tell us how you were introduced and found your way into, you know, becoming a member, and not only a member, but a long, you know, having longevity with such a band.
When I beat Matt in Mario Kart on our DS. So I was on tour with those guys, and I think it was 09. I was in Before Their Eyes at that point. And we were doing this tour with Silverstein, and that's when I met them. That's when they just put out that Witness record, or they were about to, and it was Bo's first tour with the band, like real tour. And I got really into, I just remember he was jumping off balconies and doing all this crazy stuff, and it just was like, whoa, this band's really good now. You know, it kind of blew my mind. And I ended up just like hanging out and playing video games with their drummer, or my drummer at the time, Matt. And it just kind of like bridged the gap. And back then I was such a sponge. I still, actually, this could go full circle, but when I was younger, I was a sponge. So if I watched a band and they did something crazy on guitar, I was the guy that was front row watching and just like analyzing it. And then after the show, I'd be like, show me what you just did. Like, show me how you did that. You know, because I just wanted to have like this resource pile of riffs and knowledge and just take everything in. So when I watched Blessthefall, you know, like Eric is a good guitar player, so I would be like, how did you do that? Like this cool riff. And I think a lot of touring bands don't do that. They're very just reclusive into themselves. And I'll admittedly say that I've been in that phase where it's just kind of like you almost feel like you're being challenged when it's like that. And it's not like that at all. For me, it was totally just like innocence, I guess. And so, I just kind of befriended them, I think, of just being an idiot like that and just like wanting to learn and hang out and be cool. And then I was playing with Before Their Eyes, and that was kind of winding down for me. Did my last show with them in Japan, which was like a pretty surreal moment. And then I came home and was doing that other band Legacy for a second, and pretty much was working 3 jobs and trying to make that happen. Yeah, it was this whole thing where I had been kicked out of the house, was living in this house of like 7 other people. You remember the 509? And
with like a Reuben in them?
Yeah, and I had a padlock on my door because I just didn't want people to leave me alone, kind of deal.
Oh God, yeah.
And I got the call. I was talking to one of their guitar players, and Mike. He was like, hey, I think this might be it. I think this might be it for the band. We're doing this Russian thing right now, and I think we're going to be doing this U.S. tour. You should come out and hang out one last time, kind of deal. So I got in a huge fight with my girlfriend at the time, and I was like, we need to go out to Detroit and see these guys because, you know, they're going to break up, and they're good guys, and I'd like to just, you know, hang out one last time. And my car, like, overheated, and take her car and this whole thing, but I got there, and I just talked to them, and they were all bickering and fighting about something stupid. And I pretty much told them, I was like, guys, I would kill for the position you're in right now. You just got back from Russia. You just did South America. You're on tour right now. I think it was like Atreyu and Chiodos.
Oh, shit.
Yeah. And I was just like, I would kill. I'm working my ass off to just open a tour like this. And you guys are one of the top billed bands on it. You know, it doesn't matter if the tour's not doing super hot. Like, doesn't mean your band's not going to be, you know, it doesn't mean you can't like recover from that. It's just one bad tour that happens. Like you get those ones, you get some sour ones. Sometimes the market's saturated or whatever. So I felt like the next week I got a call from Matt, and he was like, hey, what are you doing right now? And I was like, I just got off work. You know, it's like they said, well, would you be opposed to being in the like coming and filling in for a couple shows or whatever? And I was like, I literally said, I'm not trying to tread on anyone's toes, and I'm not trying to, because Mike was my friend, the guitar player that was leaving. I was like, I'm not trying to snake into Mike's position and like after he's leaving or whatever. So if he's cool, I'll do it, but obviously tread lightly kind of deal. And Matt reaffirmed to me that he was like, oh, Mike doesn't care. You're fine if you wanted to do it. Because I thought they were breaking up, and I was just filling in for a couple shows.
Yeah.
And then I got a call from Eric, their other guitar player, and Eric was like, no, we're not. We just got confirmed for Soundwave with Iron Maiden and Slayer down in Australia, and we're doing this show in Japan, in Tokyo again with Asking Alexandria, and We're Alive, and we need someone to fill in and potentially try out and start writing this record. So it was crazy. I had just finished writing a ton of songs for Legacy, and next thing I knew, they flew me out, and I was writing for their next record and learning their old songs. And I was the full circle. It was cool because I finished my last show with my old band in Tokyo and started my next show with them in Tokyo with Blessthefall. So that was really weird, but it ended up being really cool in the end.
That honestly shatters a lot of stigmas that kind of go surrounding a band like Blessthefall, because on the outside, though Blessthefall have 110% paid their dues and have been together for over a decade and have pumped out, record after record after record, through all the bumps and bruises, there still seems to be sort of a stigma of sort of like of the metalcore band.
You wouldn't believe it. We fight for everything, I think, with this band, and that's why another thing is like it never really gets easier.
Yeah,
it really doesn't, and we to this day work very hard for everything we have, and it's kind of sometimes amazing because Blessthefall has been around for so long that we're kind of one of those bands that you just Blessthefall, I know who they are. Whether you listen to music or you don't anymore, you kind of just have heard of us sometimes.
Yeah.
So there's times where they'll just see a tour coming. They're like, Blessthefall is playing. I'm sure it'll be huge. And it doesn't do that well, and it's just like by association of just being an older band, people assume that you're necessarily just still absolutely killing it. And that's not always the case. And it's, it's sometimes harder to incentivize newer fans because you're an older band. So it's kind of hard, and it really is a struggle. And when you work hard and you find new ways to make a live show cooler, and it's just the scene now is for my world is a lot different than it was even like 5 years ago, like with production and everything else. And so this whole idea of spend money to make money, that's a huge thing right now.
Oh yeah.
A lot of bands that are smaller than us are spending way more money on production or whatever, and it almost pressures you to where you have to, because you have to create a performance in a show that it's almost like keeping up with the Joneses, because kids are so used to it now because bands are doing that it's just not enough to just have this like plug-in aesthetic. It's not plug in and play and hit the stomp box and go kind of deal sometimes. And like I love that, that's one of those things that like you and I grew up with. I've never actually been a huge pedal guy or tech guy. I literally just like to plug in and just turn it up to 10 and go.
The first time I met you, you walked into my studio here and we had a conversation about how, and this is what really impressed me about you, is that one, you have a total business mind, and you made it sound like the whole band has a complete business mind, which is amazing because I don't think a lot of bands do that.
Yeah.
But you had gone into a story about how, you kind of cover all of the bases by yourself. You move your own gear. You all crowd into a van instead of buying a bus. You take care of yourselves.
Right.
And I was really impressed with that. And that kind of was, to me, and I think about it now in retrospect, is very DIY.
We're doing it on this next tour, that we're doing. We full circle with everything. We've had the bus. We did this tour on the West Coast this last summer when we got back from like Southeast Asia. We just did this small run up the West Coast into like Western Canada and all that. And we just said, what, let's just do like a really DIY, get in a van and go, minimal crew, if any crew, and just do it ourselves. Because we hadn't done that for like a year or two, and we loved it. And there was a lot of parts about it that I was like, man, this is awesome. I've totally like missed this. Like, let's just do this again. And so now we've all like kind of agreed for this next tour to like, we're doing it that way. We're just going to get hotels if we need them or whatever. There's lots of other ways to do it now though, with like Planet Fitness and things, but we can talk about that later if you want. There's tons of really creative ways to save money. So, and still get hotels or not hotels, but showers and everything. So, like, it's funny when, all the bands that are supporting roll up in the bandwagons or like the RVs and stuff, and then the headliner shows up in a van. Like that's always the funniest thing. We've had some instances where we were supporting a tour and we've had bands that are under us, like, and we're not even high on a bill, show up in a bus, and we're rolling up in a van and been like, all right, well, that bus is going to have to move because that's our parking spot.
Well, that's sort of crazy to me because like I was speaking of previously of there's 8 billion stigmas that kind of go with the kind of metalcore screamo movement. The one main stigma that comes to mind, and which is why I love what all you're saying right now, is that bands like Blessthefall or like Chiodos or Underoath or what have you, they're spoon fed everything. Their label takes care of them, And that's what the average that's what the average person believes.
Yeah, exactly.
Especially in corn-fed middle boonies, Ohio. They're like, oh, Elliott's in Blessthefall. That dude's like a millionaire. You know?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The C parts for him when he walks. You know, like
You sleep on a bed of cash. I know
you
this.
literally sleep on money.
Yeah.
No,
I wish.
but it's and so there's a lot of people, especially like younger musicians, who see you or bands like Blessthefall that are like, oh, dude, I wish. Well, there's also maybe they don't have to do it DIY anymore, and that's not the case. The DIY values, and which is
it exists.
It has to exist for a band even as established as Blessthefall.
was The Days of the Phoenix by AFI and Nothing Left by As I Lay Dying.
What does the term DIY mean to you, and how you've approached your journey in the music industry, both past and present, and how you want to take it to the future?
The first thing I think of is discipline. I think DIY is a set of foundation that you work hard for everything. Essentially, it embodies that. Because of my DIY history and working hard and being in a local band and knowing everything it takes, loading all your gear, you appreciate everything you have more, I feel like. I think it's a very blue collar way of approaching touring. My revelation recently has been to appreciate every fan and every show I play ever. And that just sounds like common sense. You know, we'll be on Warped Tour, and you and I can go back to being in like the local scene and just dreaming of a privilege to do Warped Tour, where we would eat scraps if it meant we could do it, you know, with our old bands, and we would sleep and be in any condition and we would do it, you know?
Oh, yeah.
There are bands that are on main stage that have their food brought to them every day by their crew, that stand in line for hours waiting. And there are bands that still will go out and drink and complain the whole time about how it's the worst tour they've ever done or how they hate it so much. And
that's crazy.
I don't understand that. I don't understand that, because for me, it's the easiest tour. You have catering provided for you. If you're vegan or vegetarian or whatever, it's there. You know, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. It's just like all you literally have to do all day is get out of your bus or RV or whatever you're in, stop playing video games, stop hanging out with your wife or your girlfriend, and play a show. Do something you love for 30 minutes. In front of people that adore and love you. Maybe do a meet and greet for 30 minutes to an hour. And that's your day. An hour and a half of real work, maybe. And you're making good money. You're playing in front of adoring fans. You're having a great time. And still, you have the audacity to say that it's the worst tour you've ever done or you can't appreciate it. It's like, for me, that's just insanity. You know, there's a band, Alan, you'll probably appreciate this. There's bands that are huge on that tour that came. We had Rise Against come. You know, obviously pretty big band.
Yep.
And not only did those dudes wait in line behind everybody else, but I was serving food. So you can do this sometimes as a band, is you can volunteer to serve food, like, you know, like doing lunches or dinners.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, you know, but it's cool because, you know, they have volunteers that do it, and you can go hang out with the fans who are helping too. And, you know, they give them the backstage pass thing or whatever. It's cool. Kevin does a wonderful job of creating like incentives like that. Nice. And plus, like, you can like be wearing a Falling in Reverse shirt and like see your dude come get lunch or whatever, and that's awesome.
That's pretty cool.
I think that's really cool. Like, if I could have like went and served food for Davey from AFI or something back in the day, I would have, you know, had a little Seam Boy chubby. But you know, it was cool. Not only did Rise Against wait in line, this huge line behind everyone, they could have had someone get food for them, but they were serving dinner the next night.
That's awesome.
So they get it. And I think certain bands that had to work their way to the top understand everything they have, you know, and they just flourish in that kind of environment. And I think DIY and the morals you develop when you work for everything you have really are showcased once you have, you know, quote unquote, achieved your goals in a certain sense.
Yeah.
Like, and I think you can see that, and that just to everyone around you, the way that you present yourself is just reflected. So that's how I see it a lot from me.
What we're trying to do, and this might even be just my own personal vendetta on the podcast, is try and find the answer of what the fuck happened. What changed? Yeah. What changed so much that it feels like this new generation does not have that DIY spirit?
I think everything went too fast with social media. I think you guys touched on that. I think that's definitely the tip of the iceberg. I think that with knowledge, there's power. And as people identified how to record, and that just kind of like foreshadowing, ominous, like barrier kind of just became revealed. They realized that, you know, it's easier to record and do this. It's why would I pay this studio this much money and have quality when I can just do this crappy one and then just send it and have it, you know, mixed. It's like, this will really sound jaded, but I think becomes a bit uninspired. I think that, all right, well, for me, for a couple of years here, I just kind of had this whole mentality where I felt that the old school did it better. If I want to listen to metal rest, I'll listen to Lamb of God or As I Lay Dying or some band like that that riff. And if I want to listen to like really heavy stuff, I know where to go. And I just didn't care about any of the newer bands. I just kind of wrote them all off, like just not my thing kind of deal. I never try to pigeonhole them into like that. But, there's a lot of bands I've listened to recently that I would have just written off that I'm like, you know what? It's not my thing, but I like that, or I enjoy this, or this guitar player is great, or this vocal line's fantastic, or there's things that I try to look at as a positive nature, whereas before I would have just not. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
I would say that for a minute there, I felt like metal, and it's just our genre. And I feel like all genres kind of get like this, where it's almost like a conveyor belt. They just slap a different product logo on it or a different brand name on it, and they just kind of serve you the same thing in a different context. It might have a little bit more breakdowns, a little bit heavier tuning or whatever, but it kind of all is the same thing. It kind of just embodies the same, angst, I guess. And so for me, that's just not my thing. And, I honestly, I like the Black Flag, get in the van mentality. I like the rawness of Converge and just the art behind it, like Jacob Bannon and just like what he does. And I love the chaotic aggression. And I love that it doesn't really have to make sense. It doesn't have to like be in the right key. It's just used as an expression of angst and anger and frustration and whatever you're trying to channel from aggressive music like that. For me, I just couldn't find that in a lot of newer bands. I couldn't find the genuine emotion that when I was a kid, I felt like I was achieving through some other bands. And I'm not saying that there's not talented or great musicians. I'm just saying for me, that's what it feels like with some of the even newer bands for me to do. But there are still, like I said, there are still great gems to be found within the scene. And like even today, I just found about this band that we're touring with that I think is awesome. And it's really just like changed in the way that I think that it's just become easier. It's like I was saying with the iPhone and the initiative of not having ambition. I think kids have stuck to formulas. I mean, you can go on YouTube now and look up like how to write a breakdown. And that exists.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
And so that's, to me, it's too easy sometimes.
It's funny that you say that because when I think of the bands that I've worked with, even over the past 5 years in the studio and even prior to that, what always drew me to those bands was their uniqueness. And then they would move on and go on to become something else because our formula didn't fit the norm with everybody else. So we need to kind of follow what's kind of going on and what's popular. And in my time frame, like when we were in a band, we were like, oh, look at all these bands that are popular. We were like, I don't want to be anything like that. So it's kind of an opposite reaction to it.
What I'm sort of been like kind of hit with like a revelation here is it seems like newer bands now, what they feel that is instilled into their programming, so to speak, they care just about getting to a certain point as a band. Their main focus is we need to get signed, we need to be touring right now.
Yeah, for me, Ian, there's a couple different things. Let me touch on one thing real quick.
Okay.
With Alan,
sure.
With turning away. I agree with you with when you say like, hey, that band's doing that. Fuck that. We're doing this. You know what I mean? You're kind of just like, I don't want to be a part of that pop culture phenomenon. But as I've gotten older and as bills line up, you get to that point as a band where you're like, well, we've been opposed to writing with co-writers our entire career. However, there are bands that have come up under us that have done it their entire career, and now they've shot up past that. And now we're supporting them or whatever. And that's fine. Like everyone to their own. So sometimes you're just like, you're put in a position where it's like, if I continue the course, our band will plateau. And, that's fine. We've achieved a lot. But where do you want to go for your legacy? What do you want your legacy to be? Do you want to be like, oh, well, they wrote 3 good records and then they continued to write the same record and then eventually I just stopped listening? Or it's like, oh, I want to, they got heavier or did they go poppier or whatever? Like every band, I feel at some point in their career gets put in that position. I think Metallica was there. Like everyone you can probably think of has been like, let's take a chance. Let's try and do this. Let's try and go this route with our record. And it's when it's your career and that's how you pay your bills or support your loved ones or your children, and everything. It's just, it becomes a lot more difficult to be like, fuck that. We don't want to do that. You know what I mean? Like, fuck that. We don't want to have big catchy choruses that might be in the same key as this Beyonce song. Like there are bands that do that. Yeah. So it's like, as I've gotten older and I've become a lot more open-minded and I understand, and that goes back to the business perspective, like you need to do something. Like if a certain brand, I know it sounds really shitty, but I think branding and clothing and things like that have a lot of similarities with bands nowadays.
Definitely.
And this will go full circle with you, Ian, for what I was going to say. Is if you keep putting out the same pair of jeans forever, that's great. You're going to have a consistent quality product. People are going to like it. And that's awesome. And you are going to always have people that enjoy it. But you're going to pigeonhole yourself into one specific category. And now if the wave of popularity somehow hits you and you're there at the right moment, it might be everything you needed and you might be, it might transpire into something great. However, you could alienate yourself from a majority of the masses, which some bands want. And that's just like the big question for me is you have to ask yourself what you want out of your band and what you want your music to represent. And I think a lot of people don't ask themselves big questions like that when they're sitting in a garage and they're writing or they're just jamming a song. And I think and here's what I was going to say, a lot of people aren't even thinking about music.
Oh, absolutely not.
I think the music goes on the back burner. I think the emotion and the passion falls to the wayside. And on the other side of that, some bands do think about the music and they put their heart and their souls into something and no one gives a shit. So you put yourself in a really weird spot. It's like you can be authentic and you can be passionate. And, some listeners like you and I might, like as musicians, a band's band will go, man, that band fucking rules. Like they do amazing work, And some musicians are going to look at that and go, I don't care. I can't jam that. Or some people will go, I can't rock that when I'm climbing, or I can't work out to that or whatever. And I think it just goes back to you need to ask yourself what you want out of your band and where you want to take your band. As you get older and you build your career around something, it becomes a business decision. It becomes, well, it's not just my life that rides on this. There's 4 other guys or whatever.
Yeah.
That are in this band with me.
To me, there's always something that's unique about a band that makes them that gets them through every album because it's always in that record. I mean, you guys have it. I always associate Bo's vocals because his vocal styling is just it's what captures people. It's easily identifiable. I mean, you go through bands like Metallica or the Deftones or any of those bands.
Right.
The reason that they kept going was because they kept a core piece of their sound in their sound. It's good to branch out. But I see a lot of bands, they have this core thing, this gem, and I see it. And then all of a sudden they go, I'm going to pitch this because no one's reacting to it. And they because they spent all of 10 minutes on it instead of, they think that, I've spent a year on developing this sound and then no one's reacting to it, so I just give up. And then let me do what everybody else is doing. And that drives me insane.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'll agree completely. It's like Chino and the Deftones. Like you want to hear that.
Yep.
But I also think identifying what makes your band special and what makes them a conveyor belt. Like where I was saying, where it's just like this, like you could literally slap a name, put a different band name on it, and it could be
anybody.
A different band, but sound the same. It could be anything, any kind of like grunge band or hard rock or synthy 80s pop band or whatever. But there are certain aspects to each band, like a vocalist or whatever, is what carries them. And I think it's not necessarily, it's like what you said. It's identifying that sometimes you need to play with that asset instead of getting rid of it, like with Bo or whatever. You want to take the one thing that makes your band special and catapult that to what can, provide yourself the opportunity to appeal to bigger markets or whatever, if that's what you want. And I think what you're saying too is like some bands are like, well, he's been singing like this, or he's been screaming in this heavy band, so we're going to just stop screaming now. And it's like, now people don't like you. A lot of bands have done that where they stop screaming for one record, they try to go for radio, and then it backfires. And the next thing you know, they write the heaviest record they ever put out to Recoil a year later.
Yeah, and is it too little too late at that point?
Yeah, they identified the wrong thing, and then they just pushed their fans that they do have away.
I think you might know this band. That sort of reminds me of the trajectory of Destroy the Runner.
Okay. Yeah.
Where they had that first record.
That's a throwback.
Yeah. Well, that's white belt era. They had a record. They had a record. It was Saints, and it was your atypical, metalcore. It was heavy. It had breakdowns. It had some singing in it, but I think they had that pressure of they hit it big with this one thing, but then musicians tend to run into this issue of artistic integrity. Maybe them as people got just so burnt out on the one thing that got them big, and they just make that poor, like you said, it is a business decision once you get to that certain point. And what they did was they came out with I, Lucifer, which had almost no screaming. It was almost all singing, almost a completely different guitar style. Even the production was a lot different. And I personally love that record. I thought it was super cool.
Yeah, I also love that record as well.
But it flopped.
I mean, you're right, 100%. Like they did something, they took a chance. But I'm glad they took a chance too, though. Even if it might have hurt their band in the long run, it shows that they weren't afraid to try, though, and that's cool.
Yeah,
because some bands just play it safe their whole career, and that's what they're always going to do, and that's not bad. But
no,
sometimes like with our last record, we had close to 20 songs written.
Oh shit!
And we could have been like with To Those Left Behind, we could have put out a record that was heavier than Hollow Bodies.
Oh yeah,
wow.
And we were like, we could have we had the material to make a metalcore record like that could just be huge. But we also had some weird ones and some softer ones that we had worked a lot hard on too. And we had to make the decision: do we want to just put out another really heavy record, or do we want to try and do something a little bit outside the box and push some limits in certain places? And ultimately we tried to do our best to appease both, because there are some people, obviously, how you said, they're like, I don't want to just play metalcore all the time. And sometimes there's other people who are like, well, you're in a metalcore band, so that's what you got to do.
Yeah.
So it's like it's so like
that's your expectation. Just fucking do it.
So you probably should just do that. So but I'm on that. I love what we decided to do. I love some of those softer songs. I'm glad we did it, even if it wasn't as heavy as Hollow Bodies. That doesn't mean that we can't write a record heavier than that, and we might with the next one. But it's just you always get to that point, and I'm glad certain bands do it. And I'll close it with case in point for me, As Cities Burn.
Oh God,
yeah.
No, what's funny is we're getting Aaron Lunsford on here.
Oh really?
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. Well, that's an amazing band. Yeah, As Cities Burn, amazing band. And Come Sleep, like when they lost the screaming, I thought I'd hate it. One of my favorite records. It's just one of my favorite records. And they lost one asset, but they attained an even better one. And yeah, some people are fickle, and that's just the way kids are. And they are today. They were then. It's just the way it is. But looking back on that, I would be very proud.
We're going to wrap it up here, but we're going to kind of end off on one more question. And that is, where do you see the future of music? What can we do to salvage it and to get better?
I think that music already is being corrected. I think for a minute there, it was just the system of just writing was being so abused with just torrenting and the sense of entitlement that you don't have to purchase music, and that like a band spends 6 months writing something, puts it out, it costs $10 to buy it, and they're still being rated on like their Billboard top 10 like first week. And I've said it before, where it's easier to buy a cup of coffee than it is to buy a record, and you know what I mean? And it costs the same sometimes.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's way easier for me to walk into Starbucks and be like, oh, I'll have this $3 drink, 3 of those, and I could have had the record, I think it'll just transpire. For a minute there, it was just out of control. And I don't think that it's gotten better in the sense that people have suddenly decided that they want to purchase music. But I think that they have better options. I think streaming companies like Spotify and Apple Music have really helped artists, even if they don't want to agree that it has, just because even if you're getting pennies, it's better than having nothing.
Yeah.
And that's just how devalued your product is nowadays. That's just what it is. You are in a market that's dying, and you are trying to sell something that's oversaturated. And for the most part, it's probably been done before. But so you have to ask yourself why you do it. Do you do it to get big? Because you shouldn't be playing music if you want to be rich. That's just what it is. I will say 1 out of 100 bands will even get a shot of seeing, some positives in their finances from the way musics go in the long run. Because even once you start doing it, the IRS will come after you regardless. And that's another thing with 1099s and everything else. The government doesn't make it easier for you, even as a musician. And that goes from airlines and everything else that you have to categorize on top of that. So I think music eventually is going to continue to be devalued, but I think that people will look at music and do it out of passion rather than fame and glory. And I think we'll get good music out of it in the long run. I think you'll start seeing some of those foundations and those morals and those questions we were talking about earlier being asked, because you're going to say, all right, well, why am I going to buy this $2,000 amp and work my butt off and, you know what I mean, probably never see anything for it. And it's not because you're expecting to get a 6-figure check. I don't play in a band these days because I want to be rich. I play in a band because I love the music and I love the ability to travel and go to other countries and meet people who, are like, oh, this song changed my life. This song, I had suffering from depression, had some suicidal thoughts, and this thing helped me. And I know that sounds lame, but it really isn't, because it's like this dumb song I wrote in my room or my basement or wherever, this girl in Sweden or this girl in Japan or this guy in, Israel is telling me, hey, this changed my life. And I love your band for it. And you never can, no amount of money can reciprocate those moments for me, because they're just so authentic and they speak so much to you. So I guess what I'm saying is I think people will play music because they generally want to, instead of they want something out of it. I wish I knew that when we were in Settle the Sky. I wish I knew that when we were playing in those younger bands, to where that's what money is going to be like. That's what your struggles are going to be like as a local band. I wish I understood that more, that you're still going to have to invest and be smart in certain ways, because there are things looking back I wish I could have applied myself and not been so ignorant about. However, I don't regret anything when it comes to the band and what we've done. So it's very fun, and the music industry is very complicated, and you'll grow to hate it, and you'll grow to love it in certain aspects. But you have to take care of yourself, and I think that the musicians that are willing to endure that are going to be the ones that are going to be weeded out in the end. And they'll be the ones that'll be still making music. So that's what I think.
Well, buddy, I really, really, really appreciate you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. I really appreciate what you guys are doing, and I hope you continue doing this, because I really enjoyed the first episode you did, and I think it's really progressive and proactive. So thanks for doing it. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, buddy. We'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, good talking to you guys.
Bye-bye.
All right, bye, man.
Bye.
Wow.
Like I said, when I met Elliott the first time, he impressed the hell out of me, because he's got a mindset in management, in business, but also he loves music. And to me, that was important, because of all the people that, you would think that, he's up there doing the big deal, playing on these big shows of Warped Tour and these major tours overseas and seeing different countries. And it's nonstop with him, but they still keep themselves grounded, which I think a lot of bands miss that boat. They either get too far ahead of themselves. He hit it home when he was here. He comes to visit. He visits his friends. He visits his, his family, and he takes that time, and that means a lot. And like when his whole story about giving back at Warped Tour, it didn't surprise me, because he's the type. He's down to earth. He's normal. He's like, he understands it.
Well, like I said at the beginning of the conversation, and this is definitely a very special episode for me, because I've known Elliott for an incredibly long time. I remember when he was just a young kid, like 13, 14 years old, he first started going to shows. And what's crazy to me is, even after all these years since I last seen him, it's still Elliott. And even though he's in this huge, rock and roll band, he's seen all the world. Like he mentioned, like people coming up to him saying, this changed my life. He established a long time ago with that DIY ethos, that spirit, a long time ago, when he was that refined and practiced and disciplined musician and artist. I'm going to fight for everything I want. I'm going to work my ass off to get it. And even when it's paying off, those values haven't left him. And that conversation, the hour and a half conversation we just had, that was the same old Elliott I remember. We made a couple references, the old jokes that we had, and it's like, man, that's the spirit of DIY right there. That's the scene. Both, even though Elliott and I came from the new, quote unquote newer 2000, mid 2000s scene, it's very reminiscent from the previous episode of the old 80s and 90s scene, where it was a community, it was a spirit, and it existed. And obviously we're seeing the same tagline of the social media boom has been the huge caveat, so to speak, that brought down the current status of the music scene or even the DIY spirit. I mean, it's hard to see that now, but that was a really fucking fulfilling conversation.
I think it was very enlightening. I think it's going to, a lot of people, or at least hopefully our listeners that are out there listening are going to realize that, all those musicians out there that struggle every day, hopefully some of this stuff is going to help guide them and help them kind of make realizations and go, okay, what do I need to focus on and what's important and what's not important, and just move forward and gain that momentum so they can get to these situations. And it's true. I think everybody that's involved, including myself, we do it because we love music, not because we're going to make $1 million.
Yeah. Wow. Well, on that note, what a fucking pleasurable interview. And if it's anything that I learned out of that entire conversation, what better way to do it than to do it yourself? Thanks, guys.
Thanks a lot.
The DIY Syndicate podcast will be broadcast Sunday nights at 8 p.m. Be sure to check the event calendar on their Facebook page for times and guests. The DIY Syndicate podcast is not responsible for anyone's hurt feelings or their panties in a bunch. So if you were offended, grab a tissue and have a good cry on us. Thanks again for listening. See you next time on the DIY Syndicate podcast.